All right, so first of all, I'd like to thank CJ for doing all this video setup. He's recording this for later, but also he is live streaming out on my channel on Twitch TV so that everyone else who can't make it here in person can still enjoy this show. Absolutely. So because of that, I've got a chat on my phone right here. So thank you, best Cody ever and 0x86. So when this entire thing started, we were trying to figure out what front-end frameworks do we want to do. And React was one of the ones that we started with, and I was like, okay, we have to have React. We have to have Angular. You know, Kyle said like, okay, Ember's got to be in. You know, because it's Kyle. Kyle's Ember. So it's interesting because Michael, who's done a lot of React himself, said, oh, who's going to do what thing? Kyle knows Ember. So he volunteered for Ember. And I was like, I don't know either Angular 4 or React. Michael actually knows React, but he forgot that apparently and volunteered for Angular 4. So I had to, I learned this in the last few days so I can do this.
That's my instructor.
Okay, so I didn't prepare any fancy slides or a really nifty tutorial for you guys to follow. I do have a little README here, and later on, I will Slack out. I'm so used to saying that. I'll put into the meetup notes the URL for this repo so that you guys can look through this code if you want. And for those of you watching on Twitch, I will also tweet that out. So go find my Twitter account, wherever that is, and you'll find it there later. Okay, so just like most of these tools that we've seen so far, React comes with a really nifty command line utility. Something that you run and it just like does all the initial setup for you. No needing to manually update and run Webpack yourself, figuring out how things work or anything else. It just does what you want to do. So that's what I did here. I've just run a really simple command line utility called create React app. And this is what we get. And does this zoom in? Oh, it does, way too much. Okay, so it creates for me a really nice file and folder structure for us. We have all of our source code is going to go right in here. We can ignore public. We can ignore everything else. And inside of index.js, it's a really simple system. It's just grabbing React. It's grabbing some CSS using the import, which I thought was really nifty. I don't need to bring this into the HTML file anymore. You just bring it in with JavaScript. And then we just we grab the element with the good old-fashioned document.getElement by ID. Who remembers that? And we just load our component in right here, and everything just this is our entry point. Now, if we go over to app.js, we get to see the really classic React component here. It's class-based. And it's using inheritance here to extend the good old React component where it's doing all the magic behind the scenes for us. What I do find really interesting is that React doesn't force you to run the constructor with super in it. It just does, you only need one method here, render. Now here's the other interesting thing about React. They chose to go the PHP way and put JavaScript and HTML together in the same file. Now, in the old days of PHP, like PHP 5, that was something that caused me to have nightmares. And this isn't quite as bad. This is a little bit better. Now, I think it's a little bit better because you write really small components and you can abstract away all the actual logic if you really need to, far away from the HTML if you so desire. But this is the size of this entire component. And this HTML, which is called JSX in case you're not familiar with it, it is creating this entire file. It's creating this. Super simple, super awesome. Okay, so that's all well and good, but that's just the command line utility. That's just the hello world. Let's move on to something a little bit more fun. Where is my, there we go. Check out step 2. So the next step was to do this to that monstrosity. Well, all I really did was I came in here and I replaced the index.css with the CSS file that Kyle created. And it just automatically got brought in and just caused a really big travesty. Nothing else has really changed. All of this stuff is still here, but it's no longer really doing anything for us. So this is kind of a boring step. There's not really much else for us to do here. So let's move on to the next one. Step 3. Here, I decided to set up a router and the navigation. So the router is going to go into the app.js component. So React Router DOM is an NPM module that we bring in, and it's going to bring us the browser router, the route, and this link tag that gives us these really cool routing abilities. Now the router itself lives inside of the JSX, which again is sort of a weird kind of feeling, almost as if somebody is stabbing you with a knife, but it doesn't hurt that much. So we basically bring it in as its own unique tag component. And then we just put our JSX/HTML inside of it. Now the link tag is interesting because you don't really use A tags necessarily in React. You use these link tags, which then generate A tags behind the scenes because why not, right? I mean, we want to be slightly different. So this is just to bring in the header. Now, this could be brought in as a completely different component. I can create this in its own class file, import this in, and then use this as its own tag. And I did that in like a couple of like the practice builds of this, but I decided to put this here because you don't always need to break things apart into the smallest components if you only ever do it once. Sort of my thought about it is like dry also means like if you don't have to break it apart a million times. So what does it look like now? We've got this now. So we've got a header. Great, yay. Let's move on. We're not really using our router yet. So moving on to step 4. Okay, we create a component, our first unique component that's not just using the app.js provided component, and we're now creating a route for it. So let's take a look at what the routing part of that was, because we were just there, app.js. What this means is that we've added this line right here. It's a route tag. So this is different than the router. It has to go inside of the router, and we basically say, hey, look, if our path is exactly equal to /, then load in this component in this place in the JSX. So this allows us a little nifty, movement inside of the JSX. We can like swap things in. It's a lot different than Angular router or UI router. But let's take a look at what this dog list component looks like. This is obviously a really super simple one. We basically bring in React components, we have our standard class, and we just return an h1 hello world and export it. What does that look like? Pretty much what you'd expect after you do a CSS reset. Okay, let's move on to step 5. There's 9 steps, by the way, in case you were wondering. So, step 5. Because this is an app simpler than even a to-do app, why not put Redux into it? Because Redux is a simple store that everybody needs in a React app, right? So I used React State initially when I was first building this out. I decided to put Redux in here because a lot of people will use Redux in a very real life situation, and I wanted to show one of the ways of doing Redux and how it's not quite as scary as you might think it is, especially if you tried it before, set up the 4 files you need, and then just noped out of there and ran away as fast as you could. So I found a pattern created by Brian Holt from Netflix that puts almost all of Redux into a single file, which, if you're used to the other way, is going to cause you to think that I'm an idiot. So I created a folder here named Redux. I open up dog store. Here is all of Redux, pretty much in this file. I'll go really quickly over this. First of all, we only need to bring in the npm modules Redux and React Redux. Now, I create these constant variables so I can use them later. I only need two methods here to mutate the store. Reset dogs, and then add a single dog. Next, I just set this initial state, which is really just going to be a standard JavaScript object with a dogs key and an empty array. That's all I'm going to store in Redux. Now we have the super scary part of Redux, the reducer. What this is it's a function that takes the state in, and the state may be undefined, so we'll initialize it if it's not, and this action object. The action telling this function what we're supposed to be doing here. Basically, we say, okay, depending upon what the action is, we're going to run one of these 2 functions here, reset dogs reducer or add 1 dog reducer, and we just pass in a state and action. And then we return the state, which then Redux takes and manipulates it and then makes it available for everybody else. And by everybody else, I mean all of my components. Now, one thing about Redux, and we can see this here, Redux is not very happy if you just mutate the state in place. It really wants to do something where you're taking a deep copy of it. So no using objects as references. You want a complete new copy. In fact, if you don't do that, Redux just sort of says, I'm just not going to give you an error. I'm not going to update anything. I'm just going to sort of let you try to figure out what's going on without telling you anything. Okay, so this one's easy. Reset dogs. I just completely replace the state with a new object, and there we go. We're good. The add 1 dog reducer. I do something which is considered a pretty big hack. To get a deep copy of this JavaScript object, I stringify it with JSON and then parse it back out. This creates a new object. It's actually really simple. I didn't have to do any for in loops or anything else. It just does it. Nor did I have to bring in Lodash and have them do it for me. Okay, so this create store thing, this is pretty simple. It's a function we call. We hand it the reducer, we hand it the initial state, and we hand it this giant mess of crap. This is an entire thing which allows us, if we come back here and I open up the dev tools, there is a Chrome extension called Redux, which now allows me to actually investigate the Redux store in my browser. It's really cool. And I can tell here that I have a basically dogs with an empty array. However, in order to get that to work, I have to add this entire thing into the create store. Luckily, they give you that entire thing after I just copied and pasted it. Next black magic, map state to props, map dispatch to props. What this is doing, it's saying, okay, they'll pass me the state. I take that and I say, okay, for any component that wants access to this store, this is going to be the name, the key that's going to be in the properties, and this is going to be the value in the properties. There you go. Dispatch the store is the same thing, except instead of values from the state, it's the functions that will mutate the store. So I have two, reset dogs and add one dog. And then finally, we have this connector thing, which basically just is a function that takes the map state to props and map dispatch to props. Then I export my connector, store, and root reducer for other things to be aware of. Now, one last thing to make this actually work, and this is why it's not all in one file, is back in my app.js, I bring in the store, and I bring in this component from React Redux called provider. And in that, I create a new base tag, and then I just tell it, hey, provider, here's where the store is. And this magically makes all of those properties available as props in any of the components later on, as long as I use the connector there. Now, I haven't done any of that in any of those other things. That's what this entire branch was for, just setting up this file and adding the provider in. So let's move on. Step 6. Okay, now let's go back to the dogs list and tell it that when it's about to load, let's fetch all the dogs from the API and add them to the store. So I'm going to come into the dogs list component here, and there's this so-called lifecycle method. Now, what React means when they say lifecycle method is they say, okay, this method is going to be called whenever this component is about to be loaded in, not when it's actually being loaded in. It's like, okay, you're up next, you're on deck, come here and start doing stuff, like start preparing yourself. So with this, I decided to use the brand new fetch method that JavaScript added in, which is really fun because, it is really cool. This just works. This is a GET request. The not cool thing is that it returns to you a object that has no data in it whatsoever. Nor does it tell you that the best way to get the data is to run this JSON method on it. But if you just do this little pattern, then the next time you run .then, you will have access to your actual data. So I basically says, okay, this .props.reset dogs. This reset dogs, this was my map dispatch to props. This is that function that's available to me. So I just call it and add it in and hand it the array of dogs. Then Redux comes in and says, oh, okay, I've got dogs now. Also, don't forget, put catches on your .thens. Now, to make that actually work, I had to bring in the connector, and I just wrap it inside when I export it. So it runs through that. Interestingly enough, connector will actually return the exact same thing, but with those properties and methods added in for you. And that's all I did here. But even though we don't see anything in the actual page, if we take a look at Redux, we now see that we have access to these dogs now. They're here. All right, let's move on. Step 7. Okay, let's show all the dogs on the landing page. So I can show you what this looks like right now. It's basically like what you saw with the other ones. We now have these displaying. Now, if I click on them, nothing happens. But it does attempt to go to the page that shows them. So they are links. So let's take a look at what this is. I made one crucial change to dogs list. Instead of just saying hello world, I now created a base tag of an unordered list, and I say, okay, run this function, generate dogs, which is really just a method on the same class that I put right up here. Now, this, I basically say is, okay, return, and then I do the result of a map of the Redux store's array of dogs. And inside of that, I use this dog component that I created, and I'll go to that next. And it's just going to return this as JSX. Now, one interesting thing, in any array being added in, because this is not going to be one element coming in here, this is multiple elements. But React doesn't really care about that. It's just going to take that and says, oh, okay, I'll just display it out there. However, it does yell at you if you don't add this key thing in. And it says you must have a key equals and then just something unique. So I just grab the dog from my map and just hand it the ID, because hopefully it's a unique ID. Now I can pass in properties to the other component that we're going to go look at next by just saying, here's the name of a property, and we set it equal to something. So I just pass it the dog object itself. And that's what our dogs list looks like. Okay, now let's go take a look at what the dog component looks like. This is like a pure HTML. There's nothing in here besides just a bunch of JSX. So what I have is just our list item, and we use that link because we can't use A tags. And we're just saying, okay, just go to this URL for here, all sort of normal things. What I'm able to do is I'm able to say, hey, if I want access to that dog that I passed in, it's this.props.dog, whatever was attached to the dog. So it does make it super simple for me to be able to add things in, pass things around. As long as I follow the contract of what a dog looks like, I could throw this component into any other application. Now, of course, it does require it to be passed in as the name dog, but we'll have to figure that out, for some other thing if you're passing into any old app. So with that, it does give us this. So we're not done. Thank you. We're not done yet. Step 8. All right, let's see what I did in step 8 here. Show the one dog on the one dog page. I'm not the best at naming things, so what I did was I created a component called one dog. Now, previously I toyed with like profile page, but then it's just a page with one dog on it. So one dog it became. Now, there's no link to, so none of those other components are actually aware of the one dog component. They don't care about it at all. And here's what one dog looks like. Now, this is a little bit more complex because it has to do something a little bit differently. Because when I came here and I first went to one dog here and I hit refresh, nothing would show up at all. Now the problem with that was because I was updating the Redux store from the original / page. So I said, oh, you know what? I need to have that add one dog and then check to see if maybe I should add one dog. And we can see that I'm doing that exactly right here. My Redux store only has one item in it. So all this is really doing is this checking to see, hey, if I try to get the dog from the store, if I can't get the dog from the store, go fetch it from the API, add it to the store, whenever Redux updates something, it reruns the render function for you, so everything just runs from there. And then at that point, I just say, hey, pull in that other dog component and just use it. The only other difference here is that in app.js, where I have my route, I just says, hey, route, if you are /dog/:id, load up this one dog. And inside that one dog, I can get that ID with the route, with the this.props.match.params.id. Super simple to find, right? Also, it comes in as a string, so don't try to actually match directly on that because you'll have a bad day. Okay, one last step. So when I had finished this, I had forgotten that there was a footer. So I added one last step to add a footer in. And that's it. That is React.